Welcome. This is another one of my missives about one of Charles Einstein's comparative stories. One of the things that Charles did was look at there are stories that we tell ourselves about what is real or true, and we play those out in our lives and act as if everything is real because we believe it is. And those are the old stories. And then we find out at some point that maybe that's not true. We were just having a discussion about the difference between my generation, which was raising kids in the 60s, 70s, well, mostly in the 70s and 80s, versus those children, how they're raising their children. So it's a different belief system about how one raises children, about how one lives. But the old story that he's talking about, the first one is human life before science, technology, and civilization was a brutal struggle for survival. I agree. There's a lot. That's such a hard statement because there's so many different kinds of civilizations before science and technology. His new story is Stone Age life was abundant in terms of diet, art, music, spirituality, leisure, and culture. So there's a big difference there because in the old story, you're going everything where from hunter-gatherer to agriculture to the beginnings of science and rational mind after the Dark Ages, and then you have all of the changes that were brutal, and it was a survival time. I would say there are different measures for the quality of a time than the measures that we put on them now. His second statement about Stone Age life, that it had terms of diet, music, spirituality, leisure, and culture, was pretty high. Yes, they didn't live as long as we do. Yes, they had to go out and fight their food, but one of the things that is being noticed now is that the ideas about Stone Age were based on kind of the overlaying of our patriarchal culture on top of what was found. Examples would be graves that had weapons in them were automatically thought to be male graves. Now they know a lot of them are female. A lot of the ideas about Stone Age cultures was, oh, the man went out and he hunted and the women had to stay home and they gathered berries and they took care of the kids. Well, now they're finding that in the artwork and in the graves they're discovering is that, gee whiz, who we thought was a warrior because it had shields and spears and all sorts of things in the grave was actually a female, because you could tell by the bones, particularly about the pelvis. They're discovering that probably 50% of any hunting pattern was women. So people probably hunted and gathered according to their own gifts, their own proclivities, their own strength, and then what did the village need? They're discovering in the burials that they're discovering is that there was a spirituality, there a belief in another life, a respect for the dying or the dead. The paintings on the walls in caves tell us about a high level of art, conceptual art, abstract art. So all the ideas that when I was young, and that was 70 years ago, the beliefs were overlaying our culture on the findings that the anthropologists and archeologists found. And now they're discovering those aren't true, that those cultures were much more well-rounded. If you look at Sand Talk with Tyson Yukopurta, he talks a lot about the different kinds of thinking that these different groups did and do, the indigenous do now. And part of it is what they call low context thinking and high context. And high context is one where everything you learn in what they call a kinship mind, which means that everything I know is relative to the place, to the people, and to the activities that we're doing. So you have a better memory, but it's all interconnected. And the thinking is more like what we call whole system thinking, which is everything operating at the same together. And what we see operating today is what they call low context thinking, which is the facts are isolated. They're not connected to your environment, to the people. It's just a fact by itself, isolated as if it was always true. But it has to be always understood, should be understood in a context of everything else that's going on. And Juncker Porter makes the premise that we need to get back to the thinking of the indigenous people in order to really create a better learning and create a more adaptive, a culture more adaptive to what's going on, so it can sustain and maintain itself over time. That this system of low context thinking is part of an educational system to create a compliant workforce. Do they listen to you? They do what you say, and they don't make trouble. And that worked when you wanted people to work in factories and do repetitive jobs and not get bored. But it doesn't work for a time that we're in now, where people have to be aware of a number of things that are moving. They have to be adaptable to shift their work behavior and the kinds of work they do to suit the environment and the shifts in the environment, shifts in businesses. And it's a very different way of thinking. So when you look at, we had a God of science and technology that provided us a lot, but that God is failing us now. Not that we can't continue to use science and technology, but even science and technology is changing to say, you look at the quantum thinking. It's the high context thinking. You have to be aware of all the different forces and what's acting in order to, and that means spirit and etheric as well as matter, and moving and making decisions within those larger fields. If you do that, it's our children, but mostly it's our grandchildren. If you look at the millennials, I think they do it. Their thinking is, I don't need to live my life chained to a desk. I don't need to work only the way that a boss wants me to work. There's more to my life than just doing the job. Whereas, and that's a different kind of thinking, a different kind of awareness, a different kind of how do I come to life? And in that, I believe humanity will find a richer life. Because when I was a parent, I was a single mom, I raised 2 kids, I worked full time, I did volunteer work. And I begin to wonder now when I look back on it, how did I have any time for the kids? And I did and I didn't. One of the reasons that it was hard in my generation was because there were so many of us, and you had to fight for any job that you wanted or could get. Whereas there seems to be more flexibility for the workers of today, the millennials for sure, in how they come to work. And I think they learn from watching not just my generation, but their parents' generation of losing everything, let's say in 2008. So you begin to say, there's got to be another way to come to the world, but there has to be a paying attention to what are my greater needs outside of earning money. So you find a way to earn money in order to create a life that feeds you in many different ways. So our ideas in this old story, we have a myth that somehow it's only good now. Well, I believe that if you look at the art and the cultural findings that we're finding that they did have a rich life. And yes, it was probably a shorter life. They didn't have what we have as far as antibiotics and surgeries and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff they had that we don't. They felt a connection to the land. They felt a connection to nature. They felt connection with each other. They were nurtured in that, and they made their decisions based on that. So that you have a life that's well settled in interconnections and interrelationships and interdependency. And that's what we have in those three words is what we have to return to. An interconnection with each other, interrelationship, and interdependency. Why? Because that's how humans flourish. We have the advantage of having a lot of medical that our ancestor didn't have. My maternal grandmother had like 10 kids and only 5 lived to adulthood. Why? Because there wasn't the medical care to save those babies. My maternal grandmother, her cousin, all the kids died and they had the flu, and 3 cousins just died. So it was a harder life. They didn't have the communication that we have. I'm talking about my grandmother. So I'm talking about from the late 1800s into the 1890s up through like 1920. She lived in Idaho, and the Panhandle was a pioneer experience. They didn't have communication that we have. They didn't, and they had to rely on themselves, living within the environment they lived in, creating a world that would work for them and their children. And I think that's what we're all trying to do all the time. And the mistake we make is thinking that our way is the only way and forcing that on other people. And you see that happening throughout, certainly the United States, where people have a need to control other people in hopes that that would create, I guess, the world that they think as it should be. But that's a limited form of thinking. And what we have to do is looking at paying attention to different levels of thinking and being with each other, so that our needs are met, our joy is met. I really believe, and this is what the millennials are really going out of their way to teach us, is that we have to enjoy life and live life and create a world where it works for us and it works for our kids. And we are able to take care of them and take care of ourselves in a way that's joyful. So I think the hunter-gatherers did that. And they didn't live as long as we do. We have an advantage of other things, but we still need to learn that. We need to be in relationship with the land, with nature, and with each other. And many of us have lost that. And I think that's something that humanity needs to regain, so that we get back to that, what we would call high context learning. If you look at the book Sand Talk, they talk a lot about the different kinds of mind that our indigenous ancestors had, and how that helped them respond to shifting conditions in life. Certainly they had pattern thinking, which is what you and I do when we say this is what's going on in the world, how do I adjust to that? They had dreaming mind, where they showed their relationship through music and art and dreams. Ancestor mind was the dreaming. So I would suggest that we're in a time where we're learning to more about what it means to be a human being and what it means to what the human mind's capability is. And I would hope that in appreciating the old hunter-gatherers as a very rich culture, of realizing that the stories that we've told, different times have told about themselves, are not always the whole picture. Even now, there are people who, in a lot of our state legislatures, have a belief that if they can control other people through control their bodies, control their right to vote, control their right to their own religion, then somehow the legislators' version of a good reality would take place. But that's very limited thinking. And I know they would be upset if I said that's limited thinking, but it is. We human beings were raised to know things on many levels, from matter, of land and nature, of with each other, but also the etheric spirit. And that's a big piece that's missing in the way that we come to the world and come to each other. So anyway, another paradox and another knowing and another opening up to. Next week, there will be another conversation of the Charles Einstein stories. Please, if you're interested at all in being part of these conversations, go to the website of the Language of Consciousness Institute, which is www.loc.institute-institute.com. Go to our events page and sign up to be part of the discussion. I look forward to being with you in the future. Bye-bye.